So many people lead lives of quiet desperation, waking up, going to work, going shopping, watching TV, reading before bed. But there is this feeling we all feel, but generally goes unacknowledged. An existential dread we can't even put into words most of the time, but threatens to unravel the fabric of what we constructed as our lives. A gloom that stays in the background no matter what we do, undercutting our joy and accentuating our sadness. What causes it? What can we do about it? How do we live our lives in spite of it? Can we? Radiohead's answer? Yes, you can. But it might cost you more than you're willing to pay. Hello friends, my name is Neil, and this is 4-8 Music, where excellent and praiseworthy music always wins. I take Philippians 4-8 seriously, so on Worst to First, I go through one band's entire discography, ranking all their albums in ascending order of greatness. There are 6 categories: essential, good, moderate, questionable, bad, and almost doesn't count. And please remember that everything here is my own opinion and nothing is definitive. Feel free to disagree with me, and if you do, you're not wrong. Oxfordshire, England, 1985. Abingdon School attendees Tom York, Colin Greenwood, Philip Selway, and Ed O'Brien formed the band on a Friday, named after the day of the week when they rehearsed. Colin brought his shy little brother Johnny along for the ride a little later, but they didn't perform in front of actual people for 2 whole years. That was 87, and they only played 8 gigs total in the next 4 years. But it's clearly quality over quantity here, because that 8th gig in 1991 attracted several A&R reps from major labels, and they signed with EMI and changed their name to Radiohead after a Talking Heads song. Things were off and running. I first heard about Radiohead in 1993, shortly after their first album came out, along with their first single, Creep. I was about 12, and like a massive amount of shy, disaffected youth, I felt that this song was about me, and only me. But I was stuck in my Phil era Genesis phase too, and it wasn't until 1995 that I discovered modern rock. The Smashing Pumpkins, R.E.M., U2, Oasis, Counting Crows. But Radiohead, for some reason, didn't rise to the top. Then by 1997 in OK Computer, I thought they were a little weird for my taste, or not heavy or straight-ahead rock enough for me. And then they released Kid A, and it seemed like they were being deliberately weird and obtuse. They had taken such a bold step in the direction of the strange and the esoteric that it had to be deliberate. And to my still developing mind, deliberate read as contrived, which read as fake. I've always been attracted to authenticity, and this seemed like the opposite. But then my buddy Dan, who had just arrived as a freshman to the college where I was a junior, played me a video of Radiohead performing the national anthem on Saturday Night Live in 2001. And I was like, what is this? And I instantly started rethinking everything I thought I knew about Radiohead. Indeed, rethinking something you thought you knew seems to be Radiohead's pure essence. For more than 30 years now, they have been consistently defying genres and categories, staying one step ahead of the critics and their own fans, and constantly reinventing themselves, never satisfied with where they are, and always looking to move on to the next thing. And the best part is that Radiohead is their own band. Their trajectory through the music business hasn't ever matched anything that the music world already had a definition for. Their evolution as a band has always been entirely organic and natural. They are the captains of their own destiny, and they would point that ship wherever the hell they wanted to go. Alright, let's get into it. Worst to first. But I'm a creep. The most obvious irony and embarrassment of Radiohead's entire career is their first album, Pablo Honey. They spent almost their entire life as a band in a restless state of progression, always defying convention. By the time the music world had picked up on what they were doing, they had changed again. Pablo Honey has it completely switched. Radiohead, a band still wet behind the ears in many ways, arrived on the big stage sounding a lot like pretty much every other rock band popular at the time. That's not to say Pablo Honey didn't have anything to make it stand out, but it sure wasn't the type of music they were playing. You, Stop Whispering, Ripcord, and Prove Yourself are sufficiently loud and fuzzy, but they convey the messy and immature ethos of youth without the charm or playfulness that usually goes along with it. Anyone Can Play Guitar is an early showing that they have a talent for pop songs with a dark undercurrent, and Liturgy has significant grace and beauty, even if it sounds just like the Gin Blossoms. Radiohead, from the late 90s on, were all about a unique identity, and Pablo Honey doesn't have one. What it does have is Creep. The theme song to every insecure, passionate, overthinking, passive-aggressive, self-flagellating 90s teenager who felt invisible. This song was everywhere in 1993, and not because it's catchy, although it is, or because the record company was leaning on its promotion or chart activity. It was because it hits at something deep, real, and tender in every human being. On the surface, it's about a guy pining romantically for a girl, wishing she was his. But really, it's about something much deeper, an elemental and inescapable part of the human experience. It's the desire and need for outside acknowledgement and confirmation that we are a good, worthwhile, and important person, that we matter. And though Creep's subject matter is enough on its own, the performance is really what carries it into the end zone. Thom Yorke's tender and pained vocals, Jonny Greenwood's stabbing and brutal guitar work, and Phil Selway's delicate yet powerful drumming make Creep a song for the ages that will endure. Their Radiohead concert film and road movie Meeting People Is Easy shows the last performance of Creep for 11 years. Thom Yorke doesn't actually sing it, he just holds the microphone out to the audience, with a combination of disgust, boredom, and amusement on his face. The intimate personalness Creep conveys is destroyed by it being corporate, a sing-along by a teeming throng, a fact not lost on Yorke. Blowout closes the album on a blissful, shoegazy note, and even though we've heard so much of its thick wall of sound approach in many other songs of the time, it does it right. That's a good summing up of Pablo Honey in total, really. It's pretty good music, but there was a lot of really good music in the 90s. In the midst of so many great bands and albums, Pablo Honey just kind of becomes background noise. And for Radiohead, there's nothing worse than being unremarkable. Radiohead is one of the more inventive and intricate and introspective bands to ever have gained the level of adulation that they have. There's this music that demands your attention, and you listen to it long, hard, and deep. And quite obviously, that can have its drawbacks. Case in point, The King of Limbs. It was a surprise album, being announced to the world only 4 days before its release. The bulk of it wasn't recorded in a designer studio, but in Los Angeles at the home of actress Drew Barrymore, of all places. Radiohead has always been a band that draws in on itself, and encourages the listener to do the same. And on King of Limbs, that has confusing and obscuring results. That sense of, entering into your own isolated space is definitely there, but it's not as strong as on Kid A or Amnesiac. It's in two halves, and they're like the two halves of a drug trip. The first half is manic, jittery, and filled with nervous tension. Bloom and Farrell give a sense of everything being hyper-real, flooding the listener with sensory input. Little by Little has a groove that's easy to get into, but the percussion pattern never quite seems to settle into rhythm with the melody. I don't know why, but they always seem half a step out of sync, particularly when it shifts to the bridge. Then comes the second half, where the high wears off and life restarts. Lotus Flower is groovy and danceable with a sinister, doomy undertone, and bass that can make you physically ill. Codex is in the running for saddest Radiohead song ever, with the piano part that sounds like it comes from the frozen wastelands of destroyed remains of Thom Yorke's heart. And Separator closes the album with a much-needed sigh of relief. Like they have many times before, Radiohead equates death with moving to a different state of existence, a better existence. It's beautiful and hopeful, something the rest of the album just isn't. The King of Limbs is the shortest album Radiohead has ever done, both in runtime and in number of tracks, and yet it seems longer, more of a time commitment than it actually is. And it's not quite a slog to get through, but when it's over, you feel like you put in some effort. It's kind of like I'm stuck in place when I listen to it, and Radiohead does not seem to be making much of an effort to make it a good place. Speaking of stuck in place, listening to Amnesiac is like jumping feet first into a tar pit. It's one of the most dense, viscous, and difficult albums by a major artist, ever. And I'm rating it moderate here because despite all its confusing, experientially murky messiness, or perhaps because of it, it's one of the most rewarding listens of the past 40 years. No one really likes a Radiohead album right away. Die-hard Radiohead fans, when a new release reaches their ears, always say things like, "I need to listen to it more." Their music needs time and repeated listens to marinate and properly gel, and that's never more true than on Amnesiac. It was recorded at generally the same time as their previous album, the landmark Kid A, but it's not a throwaway album or just bonus material. Even though the two came out of the same recording sessions, Amnesiac has a different tone and spirit than Kid A, and serves a different purpose as a listening experience. From the get-go, it's clear that Radiohead's not going to make it easy for you. Packed like sardines in a crushed-in box sounds like someone beating on an empty oil drum with a piece of rebar, having a grand old time as the bass joins in for a groove that's simultaneously joyful and maddening. The feelings of claustrophobia give way to waves of thick, inscrutable beauty in Pyramid Song. I've tried many times to figure out the timing of this song. 3/4 time, 5/4 time, switching between the two. At every step, the song gaslights me into thinking it's doing something it's not, and I doubt myself just a little bit too much to come up with a good theory. But I've come to a place with this song where instead of chasing after a definitive answer to quote-unquote figure it out, I just let it wash over me. By the way, it's just a 4/4 swing beat played very slowly. I Might Be Wrong centers around a groovy, dirty guitar riff from Johnny Greenwood and flips the script with its decidedly positive outlook. Knives Out has extremely disturbing lyrics about catching, killing, and cooking a mouse, a metaphor for a bad relationship. Amnesiac also features a reworking of the Kid A track Morning Bell that feels so different from the original that they're essentially different songs, despite sharing common lyrics and a melody. But its two most difficult moments, Pull Revolving Doors and Like Spinning Plates, are also its two most fascinating pieces, without which the album just isn't complete. Something about both of them repels me and draws me in. Amnesiac continues the Radiohead tradition, which is one of devastatingly dark statements about the downward trajectory of our society, delivered with numbing apathy and the slightest of shrugs. Being a spiritual sequel to Kid A, it represents Radiohead at their most turtle-like, trying to block out all the world and all of its noise and chaos and instability. But it would only be a couple of years before they poked their head out again. After the Bends proved they weren't a one-hit wonder, they decided they wanted to become the biggest rock and roll band in the world. Their next album, OK Computer, achieved that quite handily, and they quickly declared that rock and roll was stupid and they moved on. Then came Kid A and Amnesiac, which ran so far in the opposite direction, directly against the flow. By 2003, they had to have been so worn out by trying to manage everybody's expectations of them. That's why Hail to the Thief seems the most of any of their albums. Like Radiohead was saying, look, we're just going to make the music we want to make. Like it or don't like it, we really don't care. Back in the 90s, Radiohead built their reputation on cutting observations on the state of society, but it was always just observations. On Hail to the Thief, they add to it by placing the blame somewhere. And where do they place it?
They can say what they want to say, and just because they shouldn't have their feelings hurt just because some people don't want to buy their records when they speak out. I mean, freedom is a two-way street.
Yeah, they really didn't like Bush, particularly the contentious results of the 2000 presidential election between Bush and Vice President Al Gore, because a lot of Democrats felt like Bush stole the election, and hence the title Hail to the Thief. It has the honor of being Radiohead's darkest album, venturing into more disturbing and unsettling material than on their other releases. Granted, Radiohead has always had a penchant for uncomfortable honesty about the ills of society, but Hail to the Thief seems a little bit more fatalistic and doomy than they ever have been, or would be in the future. I mean, the difference isn't a lot, but it's enough to make it noticeable. 2 + 2 = 5 opens the album with a slow-building sense of dread, and a 7/4 time that puts the listener off balance from the get-go, right where Radiohead wants them for this restless, sometimes upsetting album. Tracks like Sit Down, Stand Up, We Suck Young Blood, Where I End and You Begin, and especially the harrowing finisher, A Wolf at the Door, are infused with darkness and gloom. Sail to the Moon and Scatterbrain provide some softness to balance it out, and Radiohead doesn't fail to make you move your body on Go to Sleep and Myxomatosis. But the crowning achievement here is There, in the running for Radiohead's best song. The atmosphere of this song is frightening and dread-inducing, but also transcendent. The lyrics speak of the knife-edge difference between the experience of a thing and the reality of it. We can experience things like God or the love of another person, and they can feel real to us. But are they? Is there something objectively there that we're reacting to, or does it only exist in our imagination? It's an open-ended question, and the song doesn't provide an answer. To quote There, just because you feel it doesn't mean it's there. I would add something though. Even if it's not there, you can still feel it. And that feeling is real, even if the thing causing it isn't. The music video for There is a pristinely perfect visual representation of the music, lyrics, and freakishly creepy vibe of the song. Just like There is one of Radiohead's greatest songs, the video is the best they've ever done. Hail to the Thief is an amazing piece of art, and for all its darkness and profundity, it's also one of Radiohead's most listenable and accessible albums. It is a little bloated though, and the sequencing of tracks sometimes is jarring. Among the many statements the band has made, this one is quite powerful, but it's a little less cohesive than some of the band's other albums. By 2016, Radiohead was very well established as one of the permanent staples of music history, enjoying status as elder statesman of pop modernity. It had been 5 years since The King of Limbs, and besides a failed attempt at a theme song for a James Bond film, Radiohead had been generally silent. Tom York, Ed O'Brien, and Phil Selway all had respectable solo careers, and Johnny Greenwood had established himself as a film composer. A Moon-Shaped Pool marks another point on their journey of constant evolution, and this one turned out to be their last. And that kind of makes sense, because it's not only their wisest and most mature album, it also ties up some loose ends and brings their career to a satisfying close. It's clear from the musical character, timbre, and lyrics that A Moon-Shaped Pool is also their saddest album, the one where they really wear their age on their sleeves. It's calm and measured in most places, weary and heartsick in others, and fatalistic in still others. They express their political opinions about the state of the United States and the world on Hail to the Thief, and A Moon-Shaped Pool finds them just as America was about to take a dark turn. But as such, their attitude is different than the 13 years younger Radiohead of Hail to the Thief. Whereas that one was filled with righteous anger, I don't think 2016's Radiohead really has the energy for that. Instead, they just sigh, shake their heads, and say, "You will reap what you sow." Burn the Witch is filled with doom and paranoia, and the strings that feature prominently from beginning to end nearly drive you mad. But then comes a 3-run track of soft and understated haziness, with Daydreaming, Dex Dark, and Desert Island Disc. If all the D names sound weird, it's because the Moon-Shaped Pool is sequenced with all the tracks in alphabetical order. And I didn't realize this until a couple of listens in, because even though the track order isn't based on musical progression or narrative, they all flow so well. Burn the Witch is a perfect opener, and True Love Waits is the second best closer they've ever had. Like I said, the better part of the album is gentle and almost lullaby-ish, with tracks like Daydreaming, Glass Eyes, Present Tense, and Identikit sounding alternately relaxed, morose, and sleepy. The Numbers presents itself like a harmless guitar ballad, but reveals a darkness that leaves you feeling disturbed about you're not sure what. And then Burn the Witch, and especially the transcendent Full Stop, work in force and relentlessness, with unavoidable tragedy as the centerpiece. And like the masters that they are, they save the best for last with True Love Waits. The song breaks my heart every single time. In it, Tom York explores devotion, dependence, and the ephemeral nature of human love. He does this, like he almost always does, in simple yet esoteric terms, and he makes it seem like our attempts to understand him are like vaguely intrusive, or like a light violation of his privacy. What's even more striking is the history this song has been through. It was first performed all the way back in 1995, presumably being written around that time. It didn't make it onto their second album, The Bends, because they never found an arrangement that captured the song's emotional rawness on tape. But Radiohead continued to perform it live, and it became a fan favorite despite it never getting a studio version. It saw official release on the live album I Might Be Wrong in 2001, a surprisingly emotionally vivid album, due in no small part to the earnest acoustic rendition of True Love Waits. Radiohead soldiered on through the 2000s and the 2010s, but always kept True Love Waits in their back pocket. At the 11th hour, it finally got a studio treatment as the closing song on the album that closed Radiohead's career, A Moon-Shaped Pool. But the real kicker is the emotional content of the song, and the journey that goes on through the decades. In 1992, while they were both students at the University of Exeter, Tom met Rachel Owen and began a relationship with her. They had 2 children together, and even though Rolling Stone reported them as unmarried as late as 2012, it turns out they actually had a secret wedding ceremony back in 2002. They separated amicably in 2015, and Rachel passed away after a battle with an unspecified cancer a mere 16 months later. There's no information on this, nor is there any reason there should be, but it's my conjecture that Rachel and Tom knew about her cancer long before her death, and they consciously together decided to decouple from one another. It may seem strange to us, but it must have made sense to them. Rachel gets a clean transition from this life to the next, and Tom gets to move on, and they both get a peaceful end to their story together. Enter True Love Waits. Tom wrote it just a year or 2 after meeting Rachel, and it had a pretty specific meaning back then. You can hear it in the 2001 live rendition. It's one of lovesickness and pleading adoration. The refrain of don't leave," is a cry of desperation for a lover not to turn away from him. But over time, that changed into the studio version we get on A Moon-Shaped Pool, in the dwindling twilight of Radiohead's career. That twilight matches Rachel's twilight of this life, with her passing only 7 months after the song and album's release. And Tom's vocal performance has changed too. It's gone from desperate to mournful. He's no longer pleading for her not to leave him, but not to leave at all. Don't leave. Stay. The world is better because you're here, and it'll be worse without you. Don't leave.
And now for something completely different.
In 1993, Radiohead performed Creep and Anyone Can Play Guitar at the MTV Beach House to a crowd of half-dressed partiers in front of a swimming pool on a warm summer day in Malibu. The setting could not have been less appropriate for an introverted band of Brits playing a gloomy, depressing song about how pathetic a person the narrator is. And everybody seemed to know it, especially Radiohead. Tom York goes from vaguely uncomfortable to screaming into the camera and then diving into the pool fully clothed. It was just weird, man. After that, Radiohead was done with all this one-hit wonder nonsense. They had to prove to the world that they were more than that they were more than just one song. So they got to work on an album that would take them from post-grunge obscurity to arena rock stardom, 1995's The Bends. This thing was specifically designed to display Radiohead's potential as hit-making, concert-filling megastars. The first phase of this new rollout was the My Iron Lung EP, and when the album released a few months later, Radiohead was officially a name in the music world, complete with comparisons to U2 and REM from critics, and rightly so. Everything about The Bends is a vast improvement over Pablo Honey. If that record was the senior project for an art student, The Bends is a full-scale art installation at the Met. Planet Telex makes that clear with its expansive, shimmering guitar tone and ambitious vocals. Gone are Tom York's messy attempts at grunge attitude, replaced by earnest and measured gut punches of emotional gravitas. Just has all the raucous energy of their first record with a more focused and deliberate delivery, as do Bones and the title track. My Iron Lung is a response to their biggest song, Creep, which won them a horde of fans who loved having their ears tickled and had really short attention spans, the exact opposite of the kind of fan base they wanted to cultivate. Its messy production echoes Pablo Honey, which isn't really a good thing, but it's probably deliberate. My Iron Lung is lyrically and musically an invective to their fans who liked Creep and their record label that wanted their second album to be just 12 creeps in a row. Tom hits his peak at the end of the third verse. This is our new song, just like the last one, a total waste of time. Singles High and Dry and Fake Plastic Trees are nothing short of full-fledged, lighter-wielding power ballads, where Radiohead control the flow of emotional appeal and powerful intensity like seasoned professionals, not young punks on their sophomore album. But the best song on The Bends, and one of Radiohead's best songs overall, is Street Spirit Fade Out. It's a song about facing your mortality, about meeting death not as something that happens to you, but as a character in a story. Death is the titular street spirit, and the song talks about it as an inevitability, a visitor we all have to host sooner or later, but sometimes more than once. Such a perspective can only be achieved by someone who has faced death himself, and Thom Yorke has. He was in a near-fatal car crash when he was 21, and his brush with death influenced many songs, from Stupid Car from their pre-Pablo Honey Drill EP, all the way to Bending Hectic from their debut album By the Smile, Tom and Johnny's post-Radiohead project. In that car crash, Tom met the street spirit. He faced the god of death and said, "Not today."
And there is only one thing we say to death. Not today.
And so have I. When I was 21, same age as Tom, I had a stroke and was diagnosed with blast crisis chronic myelogenous leukemia. I almost died. The doctors told my parents to say their goodbyes. I've met the street spirit too. I've seen its beady eyes. And now, whenever I hear this song, I pray. And it's a prayer of thanksgiving to God. Because when I was 21, Jesus said to the god of death on my behalf, "Not today."
What do we say to the god of death?
Not today.
Go.
The band shows Radiohead to be a bona fide stadium act, the kind of band that could follow in the footsteps of such crowd pleasers as U2, Journey, Def Leppard, and Foreigner, if they wanted. And as we've seen from the rest of their career, they most certainly did not want. But for a few years there, including with the release of OK Computer, it really looked like Radiohead was going to conquer the whole world with guitars, volume, and the power of rock and roll. But a close listen to the lyrics all over the bends show that Radiohead really wanted something different for themselves. In the movie Being John Malkovich, main character Craig discovers a way to enter the mind of actor John Malkovich and completely control him. So he forces Malkovich's career to take a hard, swerving left turn from actor to puppeteer. Malkovich, who has incredible skill in one field that's made him famous, reveals overnight that he has an incredible skill in another field, completely unbeknownst to the entire world. That's what Kid A feels like. Radiohead climbed the ladder to the top and successfully became the biggest rock band in the entire world, and they quickly went from that to this.
Why? Because it sucks. Fucking rock music sucks, man. I hate it. I'm just so fucking bored of it. I hate it. It's a fucking waste of time.
And for their next album, they ran so far from where they started and risked alienating their entire fan base. But it worked. I have no freaking idea how, but it worked. Kid A not only broke every barrier and busted every preconceived notion of what a pop band could do, but became an enduring statement that is still reverberating. I have a hard time classifying Kid A, maybe the hardest I've ever had, but electronica, IDM, and dark wave seem to rise to the top, as well as krautrock. By the way, that term krautrock really frustrates me. It was coined in the 70s to refer to the experimental, long-form, ambient sort of rock that was coming out of Germany and Eastern Europe at the time, but they couldn't call it progressive rock because that was already a thing. So instead they settled on a name that refers to the geographical location where it was centered, and a racist one at that. The term's offensive and kinda useless.
That's racist.
Anyway, Can and Kraftwerk are definitely on there in Kid A, but so were DJ Shadow, Björk, Charles Mingus, Brian Eno, The Talking Heads. And even with the many sources that Radiohead draws from for Kid A, I'm not reminded of any of those artists when I'm actually listening to it. Instead, I get lost in its fuzzy, introspective, and sometimes disturbing world. Nothing else exists when Kid A is on, or if it does, I'm barely noticing it. Everything in its right place plunges the listener deep into that world, obliterating whatever else is occupying the listener's mind. It's like a descent down a rabbit hole, a waking up to another dream. And by the title track, we're already aware that we're in completely uncharted territory, where things sound and feel somehow off, yet less wrong and more right the more time passes. The national anthem has a revolving bass line Thom Yorke composed when he was 16, and the band tried recording this song twice, but it didn't fit on OK Computer or the Bends, but was deemed too good for a B-side release. Hearing this song for the first time was one of those few moments in my life where I stopped, froze in place, and then started reconstructing my entire perception of the world, bit by bit, block by block. It made me question who I thought Radiohead was. It made me question what I thought music was. It made me question who I am. It made me question the nature of reality. 5 stars. Highly recommend. Idiotech combines sharp, staticky beats with electronic piano notes that sound like they're wrapped in cotton, and has a rhythm that's at once rigid and inconsistent. Optimistic reaches new depths of gloom and fatalism, and How to Disappear Completely, featuring the only appearance of the acoustic guitar on Kid A, delivers deep, aching sadness of the most human kind amid alien soundscapes, amplifying both the relatable and the bizarre elements of the song. Disappear is probably the best example of something that Radiohead does better than anybody, not just on Kid A, but in general, and that's flawlessly combining the cosmically, transcendently beautiful with yawning chasms of dread and darkness. And Morning Bell is both soothing and restless, a lullaby that's had too much coffee. Its 5/4 time signature and jittery staccato drum pattern give it a nervousness and unsettling energy amidst its minimalism. Things that its Amnesiac counterpart dismantle completely. Kid A is so many things. It's dark and fatalistic, but it's also bright and beautiful. Sometimes it's warm and dreamlike, and other times it's harsh and stabbing. And ultimately it asks, how do we progress through this life with hope and care and compassion when we live in a world that systematically sucks all those things out of us and replaces them with fear, cruelty, and indifference? And it doesn't give any answers either. We just have to figure it out on our own. Let me give you all a psychology lesson here today. I'm an HSP, or highly sensitive person, but I also have a trait called HSS, or high sensation seeking. It means I have a constant desire for experience and emotional stimulation. I often read the same books or watch the same movies over and over and over again, just to feel things that I know that they will make me feel. And my desire for emotions isn't limited to good emotions, like happiness or contentment or joy, but also bad ones, like fear and sadness and tragedy and horror. Basically, I have a need to feel things. And I think it's essentially important, not just for me, but for everyone, to feel all of the feelings at some point in your life. After all, God made emotions, so emotions aren't bad. Emotions are like water to me, each one a different colored jewel, and I just can't get enough of them. Except I can, and often do. Being an HSP means I get overstimulated very easily, and being sensation-seeking means I often put myself in situations where I will be overstimulated, or at least come right up to the line. It's a tricky tightrope to walk, and I can't not walk it. It's literally part of my personality. This brings me to In Rainbows. I think my favorite thing about Radiohead is that of all my favorite bands, they most completely cover the entire height, depth, length, and breadth of the human experience, and they do it from an emotional perspective. And while most of their music is spent on things like paranoia, isolation, numbness, and existential dread, they also cover the likes of joy, ecstasy, love, forward motion, and human connection. And In Rainbows features the easiest and most obvious doorway into those good feelings, which I enjoy the most. Musically, In Rainbows is easily Radiohead's most joyful album, and even the name speaks of the wide array of emotions on this album. A rainbow, by definition, contains all of the colors, and we're in the rainbow, not just looking at it. And it's not just one, we're in rainbows, plural. On their last album, Hail to the Thief, Radiohead had finally freed themselves from caring what others thought about them, but that record was the purge of all the sludge and refuge that had built up in their collective system. By In Rainbows, 4 years later, they were free of all that, and finally ready to make something beautiful that was truly them. It started with a bold new approach to marketing and promotion. The day it was announced was also the day it was released in its entirety as a digital download from the band's own website, where fans could set their own price for the music, including no price at all. In effect, In Rainbows was given away for free. It's been done many times, but I'm pretty sure Radiohead was the first, at least at that scale. I'll admit that I went to the Radiohead website and paid $0 to download the MP3s. After all, they'd let me, so why shouldn't I? But I also paid $20 to get the actual CD, which comes in some spectacular packaging. The cover is like bright and bold, and is unlike other Radiohead releases in its unashamed colorfulness. As a result of this pay-what-you-want model, In Rainbows became one of Radiohead's most successful albums, but I think that has less to do with the marketing scheme and more to do with just the wall-to-wall outstanding music on this album. It starts with a skittering computer-like beat that you can't quite figure out on first listen, since it's in 5/4 time. When the guitar 15-step kicks in, you're already grooving, and its non-standard time signature is not an issue. A song that feels natural to your body rhythm, even though it's in 5/4, it's high-level stuff. It's so hard that Dave Brubeck got famous from doing it once. And indeed, rhythmic jazz is a major influence on 15-step, and a lot of it in Rainbows. And Radiohead sounds more excited and energetic here than they have in years. Body Snatchers is about feeling trapped in a situation you have no control over, and perhaps about Radiohead's frustration with their previous record label, EMI, and their pattern of muzzling and castrating creativity. In Rainbows was self-released by the band, so all that was done for Radiohead, but plenty of bands are still trapped in that stifling environment. And Body Snatchers again shows Radiohead in a more energetic space, this one angry and defiant. Hey Tom, what happened to that rock music sucks thing? This sounds an awful lot like a rock song to me. Nude, All I Need, and House of Cards balance it out with slow, relaxed grooves, and Nude in particular takes its time with a bass line that elegantly glides its way through the song. But it has just enough going on in it to prevent you from falling asleep, like that skittering guitar effect in the second verse. Johnny is apparently scraping all his fingers across the guitar strings to create it. And the lyrics to Nude are devastating, and their impact is not lessened by the lazy, unhurried tone of the song. Reckoner is like the mirror image of Optimistic from Kid A, matching its doomy vibe but with more redemptive lyrics, like there's a good end to the downward fall of Optimistic. Jigsaw Falling Into Place is another track filled with energy, and has the focus and deliberation that a band that's been together for 20 years can do flawlessly. And then Videotape ends an album full of emotional color with a muted gray, fading out to black. It's ironic and somehow perfect that Videotape takes all the existential dread In Rainbows has spent most of its length skirting around, and lets it all out in one burst. And it's less like a burst and more like a car sputtering to a stop as it runs out of gas. However you slice it, Videotape brings the variegated emotional experience that was In Rainbows to a calm and quiet end, but it doesn't let us forget who we're listening to here. This is Radiohead. If you're listening to them and not thinking about death and its inevitability, you're doing it wrong. There's no wasted space on In Rainbows. It's only 10 tracks and just over 40 minutes long, so it's very tight and concise. And it seems like a lot of thought went into its composition, but not really. Johnny Greenwood says that they kind of rushed through it. Whatever happened, it leaves no room for doubt or conciliation. A lot of fans hold it up as Radiohead's best album. I would narrowly disagree. Right at the cusp of the 21st century, before Google, before smartphones, before Musk, Bezos, and Zuckerberg decided to lick the toes of the almighty Trump, there was the World Wide Web. Of course, there still is today, but no one calls it that. It's just the internet or the cloud, if it's called anything at all. It's such a given. When you buy or rent a home, Wi-Fi capability is an essential amenity, like electricity and heat. But in the 90s, it was called the web, and it was a growing but still nascent presence in our lives, with its reach and influence taking hold more and more.
You could check porn and stock quotes.
I need hydration. In 1997, Radiohead created the soundtrack to all of this with OK Computer. Boy, how did they not think it was going to go well. And boy, howdy, were they right. OK Computer is one of those flawlessly timed albums that captures its cultural moment precisely, can never be repeated, and only gets more relevant the more time passes. Radiohead had become an undeniable presence in 90s rock with the Bends, and things were different than after Pablo Honey, namely that their record company believed in them. I should amend that. They believed in the version of Radiohead that filled festival grounds and made them a bunch of money. But Radiohead were already evolving past that. When EMI gave them a blank check for their third album and said go nuts, they weren't expecting something as weird, innovative, or introspective as OK Computer. But that's the most astonishing thing about this album. It works as a chart-topping pop album and as a boundary-pushing art rock experience. With all the strange and new territory that it takes its listener into, it retains an emotional core, even while it's blazing new paths. Singles Karma Police and No Surprises might seem like huge step forwards for the pop world, but they're among the tamer of OK Computer's offerings. Karma Police has a piano riff throughout that anchors its dread-filled vibe, which becomes overwhelming by its maddening cacophonous finale. No Surprises has some of Thom Yorke's most depressing and devastating lyrics, amid some of the most gentle and pastoral music in Radiohead's entire discography. And first single Paranoid Android announced to the world that Radiohead had moved to the next level, a more mature, more rewarding, but less understandable one. And they seem to know that not all the world will be following them there. Paranoid Android was a deliberate choice as the first single because it was meant to do the opposite of what Creep did 4 years earlier, to winnow down Radiohead's fanbase and get rid of all those shallow, spineless morons who just like Creep on the surface. And it did that, but it also turned on millions to the new direction Radiohead was heading in, winning them 10 times more fans than they lost. I remember seeing the music video when I was 16 and not being one of those millions. I just wasn't ready for Radiohead yet. I could hear them inviting me along, but they just gave a shrug when I stayed in place, and they said, "We're not waiting for you." And I caught up to them eventually, but I wish I had been quicker to join them on their journey. Of that 10 times more fans I mentioned, a great number of them were already primed for Radiohead fandom by the movie Romeo plus Juliet, starring Leo DiCaprio and Claire Danes, and the Radiohead song featured on its famous soundtrack, Talk Show Host. The movie also features exit music for a film during its end credits, a good 6 months before OK Computer came out. Unlike the movie itself, which is the cinematic equivalent of shotgunning 15 cups of coffee all at once, exit music is quiet, somber, and haunting in its beauty and dread. The lyrics, which could be from Romeo to Juliet, or vice versa, don't talk about love or gooey romance, but instead about rebellion and escape, as if death and suicide are ways to stick it to your parents rather than, the end of life. Airbag is yet another example of Thom Yorke's trauma around cars, exhibited in many other songs, but here given a brighter and slightly more triumphant treatment. As an album opener, it beautifully demonstrates OK Computer's dual nature as a relatable pop album and fascinating puzzle with its heavy guitar and motivating beat. And someone passingly familiar with music theory will notice an intriguing violation of modes and keys in that opening guitar salvo. What's going on with those sharps and flats? Is it Ionian, Aeolian, Mixolydian, all of them? It's hard to come up with a good answer. Electioneering provides some rock muscle, ironically more than any track on Pablo Honey or the Bends, and Climbing Up the Walls is surpassed only by There There as the most terrifying song in Radiohead's catalog. It's not just the lyrics, which are unsettling enough, but the dank, haunted house musical motif, which evokes dirty basements with flickering light bulbs hung on strings, where unspeakable things wait in the shadows. OK Computer is more than just an album of songs, or even a singular piece of art. It captures the moment of the late 90s exquisitely, but takes on a new meaning whatever time frame it's viewed from. It's salient in its contemporary context, and turns out to be increasingly prophetic as each decade passes, and it rings even more true today than it did almost 30 years ago. And it has a near-perfect mixture of innovation and relatability, darkness and transcendence, strong emotion and crushing apathy. And above all that are the songs, which never sink below "this song is pretty great" and rise to "where was this all my life?" It's not Radiohead at their most developed, and some would argue it's not even them at their peak, but it's Radiohead when they mattered the most to the greatest portion of the world, and when what they had to say to that world was the most important. So here's what I used to think, particularly when I first got into Radiohead around my graduation from college. Smart people like Radiohead. I didn't go so far as to say that only smart people like Radiohead, because that clearly wasn't true. But I just thought liking Radiohead was just a natural outflow of being smart. It was like A is true and B is true, so C must be true as well. Where A is you're smart, B is you've heard of Radiohead, and C is you like Radiohead. But then I met my wife, who has a PhD in chemistry, has been a college professor for the past 14 years, and wrote her doctoral dissertation with a title full of words, only half of which I understood at the time. She's really, really smart. A is clearly true for her, and ever since she met me, B was true as well. But C is not true. She doesn't like Radiohead, and never has. Believe it or not, this troubled me for a long time, but a friend helped me realize two things. One, music operates on many more levels than just intelligence. And two, what music you like is a really, really bad barometer for intelligence. Still though, if you like Radiohead, it can only earn you points in my book.
I passed the test.
Sometimes you can't love something until you see someone else loving it, so thank you so much for listening. And I hope this has helped you to at least understand Radiohead a little bit better. And if you're just starting out with their music, make sure you give it time and repeated listens to really marinate and get into your system. If you like this video, you should like it, and hit the subscribe button to see exactly when my next video comes out. And if you have anything to say about Radiohead or any of these albums, or just music in general, be sure to leave a comment below. And if you do, say nice things, say true things, and always be kind. God bless, and rock on.